Reaver has truly earned his infamous reputation across the magical land of Albion. A man whose debauchery, darkness, and eloquence brought about the end of many. He looked magnificent as he did so, exactly as he deserved. In this episode, we will dive across the ages of Albion, straight into the legend of Reaver, a hero by nature but never by his actions. Known by many names and many titles, the Pirate King, the Thief, the leader of a secret society, the hero of skill, and in Albion's darkest corners, a cockroach that refused to die, all of them earned. So, sit back and relax with a crunchy chicken and allow me, your tour guide Scarion, to walk you through this scoundrel's long and twisted life. You little scamps. We begin our tale in the serene town of Oakvale in the dawn of the Age of Enlightenment, a region known for its beauty, its hard-working farming community, and most notably, the formation of Albion's Anti-Hero League, a movement that brought an end to the Age of Heroes 3 centuries before, a riveting tale in itself. Among the children born and raised in this town was one who, in time, would discover abilities like those of the heroes of old. A hero of skill with such precision, speed, and natural mastery of ranged combat that some say he could shoot a flea off of a dog's head without leaving so much as a scratch on the pooch. He would become known to many as Reaver, though in this era, his true name remains unknown. Despite his natural gifts, as he grew older, the young hero became known not as an exceptional marksman, but as a selfish, cheap thief. It must have been difficult for him, a young man in a town that had brought an end to the heroes, to possess abilities so reminiscent of them, even if neither he nor anyone else yet understood what they truly were. Oakvale was a haven away from the darker parts of Albion, but whatever peace it offered never reached him. Behind his facade of cockiness and sharp humor was someone desperate to be known. Attractive and fiery on the surface, he felt delicate, breakable, and profoundly afraid of his own mortality. He had friends, family, and even a girl he loved. The kind of things that should have made life feel full, but none of it was enough to quiet that fear. This is not a happy tale. It is a dark one. In time, the young man reached beyond himself and summoned one of Albion's most mysterious and darkest forces, the King of Shadows, an entity of immense power, ruler of the Shadow Court and its horrific shadow judges.
Welcome. Welcome. Welcome.
Desperate and afraid, the man begged for immunity from the disease of time and death. The King of Shadows recognized a soul like this at once and found no glimmer of light within it. In the young man, the King of Shadows saw a deeply self-indulgent trait, a mind unconcerned with others or the consequences of its actions, and seized upon that weakness to strike a deal. And what was that deal? Eternal youth. The man agreed without asking the price. With a bargain struck with the Shadow Court, the young man's life changed in an instant. The very moment the deal was made, shrieks filled the air of the once serene town of Oakvale as shadows flooded the region and devoured the population. The hero ran madly through the fields as the cost of his gift became clear, before falling to his knees and watching the town he had called home turn into a dark circus of screams. Corruption claimed the buildings and the people alike, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Among the chaos was her scream. In that moment, he lost his friends, his family, and everyone he loved. This moment changed him. As he left the corpse of Oakvale behind, he abandoned his former name and became Reaver. Over time, Oakvale and the surrounding land festered and rotted into a marsh the locals came to call Wraith Marsh. At the heart of this once humble town, long untouched by the sword, the Shadow Court claimed their home within a deep well of tombs. Hollow Men, Balverines, and Banshees soon followed, adopting the ruins as their own. One selfish wish had led to the fall of this once great town, albeit he never understood what that wish would cost. For decades, Reaver traversed Albion as it slowly changed around him. Immortal, charming, and keenly aware of how to get what he wanted, he lived without consequence. Yet, despite having everything he desired, he was still plagued by nightmares of the day Oakvale fell. Nightmares a chalice of wine could usually send back into the dark. The deal he had made was awful, but there was more to it than he first understood. To maintain his youth, the hero was required to offer a tribute to the Shadow Court. Once a year, a dark seal appeared before him, one that had to be returned to them in their tainted home of Wraith Marsh. The cost was simple and cruel. Whoever carried the seal back would have their youth taken so that he might keep his own.
But when the sacrifices stop, we will come for him.
Gifted with words and charm, Reaver always managed to find someone trusting enough to perform this small favor for him. Such things were never meant for someone like him. Although driven by self-interest, with the belief that pleasure was life's highest goal, he still felt an ounce of guilt for what he did, buried beneath the witty comebacks and deadly precision of his pistol. It was with that same precision that drew his attention during his travels to the tale of the Dragon Stomper 48, a limited pistol of which only 6 were ever crafted. Something so rare called out to him, and limited weapons were very much his specialty. He decided he would own all 6. On his journeys from the icy north of Huck Coast to the southern reaches of the Bandit Coast, Reaver tracked down one of the Dragon Stompers and, to increase its efficiency, had it enchanted so that it never needed reloading. Over in the bustling Bowstone region, he discovered another owner of the weapon, Count Zamoyski. Though Zamoyski had lived by his Dragon Stomper, he also died by one. Reaver cared deeply about his reputation and how he was perceived, so when he heard a man named Wicker, known across the land as the finest shot across Albion, he tracked him down and challenged him to a duel. How dare another person claim to be better at something than he was? Wicker's swift death removed a rival and one more obstacle to the hero's growing infamy. Reaver was, by his own description, a hedonist, and he put the centuries to enthusiastic use. He spoke often, at length, and usually got what he wanted, whether by charm or by the quiet implication of his pistol. As Wraithermarsh grew ever more treacherous, the only reliable way to reach the growing, lawless port of Bloodstone was by sea. Since the Fall of Oakvale, Bloodstone had taken shape on the southern coast, a port town completely surrounded by Wraith Marsh and untouched by the laws that governed the rest of Albion.
What are you? A
Over the years, Bloodstone became a haven for Albion's undesirables, pirates, thieves, murderers, people who governed themselves and treated revenge as a civic right. It made perfect sense that Reaver found sanctuary there. By this point in Albion's history, the age of piracy was well underway, and in a port like Bloodstone, piracy was less a profession than a necessity. Reaver responded as one might expect. He commissioned a ship and attempted to name it the Narcissus, a moment of rare honesty on his part. Unfortunately, the name was already taken, and even Reaver found the law resistant to persuasion. Settling for the next best option, he named the ship after himself, the Reaver. For many years, Reaver had cultivated his reputation by any means available, and he finally found his moment to elevate it further when the self-proclaimed Pirate King, Captain Dread, attempted to claim tribute from the people of Bloodstone, a fee for their protection. This was Reaver's territory, and he took it upon himself to protect the denizens of the port town from extortion, so that he could extort them instead. Captain Dread considered the fee entirely justified, a tithe for his efforts to help the port towns. Reaver did not share this view. When Murphy Squire, an emissary of the so-called Pirate King, arrived in Bloodstone to collect it, Reaver killed him outright. He severed the man's head, carefully wrote a note, placed it in the emissary's mouth, carved the letter R in the severed flesh, and sent it back to Captain Dread as his response. I've seen portraits of you. You're much too pretty to be a pirate king, much less one named Captain Dread. Stay out of my territory. Yours respectfully, Reaver. To ensure the message was impossible to misunderstand, Captain Reaver of the Reaver took to the coast and tracked down the rest of Dread's emissaries. To antagonize a man who styled himself on fear was a calculated insult, but Reaver did not fear anyone. If anything, he seemed to enjoy the introduction. Dread grew angrier with every head returned to him. Reaver, on the other hand, was offended, not by the threats, but by the audacity. When the Pirate King finally decided Reaver needed to die and placed a bounty of 500 gold pieces on his perfectly styled head, Reaver took it personally. 500? He was worth far more than that. He briefly considered placing a bounty on Dread in return, if only to make a point, before deciding it would be more satisfying to deal with the man himself. Their conflict came to a head when Reaver traveled willingly to Dread's ship, the Marianne. He slaughtered the crew, then fired a single shot into an oil lantern hanging above Dread's head. The lantern ignited, and Dread burned. The hero left only one survivor, Smiling Jake, chosen deliberately, spared not out of mercy but usefulness. Someone had to live to tell the story properly, and with Captain Dread dead and his legend in ruins, Reaver decided there was no reason to let a perfectly good title go to waste. Pirate King suited him well enough. It was, after all, only fair. In a final petty gesture, Reaver decided to build himself a mansion in Bloodstone and remain there. Captain Dread, in his final moments, before the incident, had once claimed the port was the crown jewel of his empire. Reaver took it upon himself to one-up the dead man properly, ensuring that the jewel would belong to him instead. Through his conflict with Captain Dread, Reaver finally attained the infamous reputation he had always desired. A pirate king in truth as much as in title, he was known as a man of incredible aim, impeccable style, and cutting wit. Though a hero by blood, the age of heroes had ended centuries before, and the very idea that one might still exist had long been dismissed as impossible. Reaver was known for his long-short temper and for a particular fondness of seeing himself reflected back at him. Sculptures, paintings, portraits in every form he could commission. He could afford it, after all, and saw no reason to deny the world the pleasure. When the Bloodstone Manor was finally completed, he opened its doors to generations of guests, inviting them to admire his wealth, his taste, and most importantly, him. Over these generations, even the locals noticed that Reaver did not age as other men did. In Bloodstone, however, such observations were best kept to oneself. People there learned early to mind their own business. That same indifference suited Reaver well. He welcomed anyone he fancied into his home, often on a whim, though such generosity did not always end in his favor. While consorting with a woman named Ursula, one of his many such arrangements, Reaver was discovered by Penelope, who responded by setting fire to his mansion while he slept. Reaver woke in time to escape. The man he had been sharing his bed with, Andrew, did not. Waking him would have required effort, so Reaver left him there to burn instead. Reaver was fond of his mansion, and in an attempt to mend relations with Ursula and Penelope, he set about restoring it. The greater challenge proved to be staffing, and one by one, those who disappointed him tended not to keep their positions or their lives for very long.
Do you think my buttons look like that? This is my first night back since the renovations. And I must say that chap from Rookridge has done a splendid job. Small miracle, considering he had recently lost 3 toes and 2 family members. But what was I to do? He wouldn't be persuaded to abandon the construction of some worthless temple to aid me in my time of crisis. And his predecessor had simply the worst taste in furnishings. I was generous to let him live as long as I did. Now that awful scent of burnt wood and flesh has dissipated, perhaps I shall throw a party. Ursula and Penelope will be my guests of honor. Shame Andrew crumbled to ashes in the fire. What a sweet young fellow, but such a heavy sleeper.
In the months that followed the completion of the renovations, Reaver's travels carried him across Albion, sometimes alone, sometimes accompanied, depending on his mood. Over time, he even managed to acquire 5 of the 6 Dragonstomper 48 pistols. 4 were claimed from the hands of men he killed. The last one, however, continued to evade him. Ursula and Penelope also accompanied him on several of these journeys, but not everyone he travelled with returned.
It's good to be home after these 3 last months at sea. My ship barely made it to port under the weight of such spoils, and then only after we disposed of those less valuable. It was a pity to see my new brides sink into the ocean, but their sizable attributes rendered them unfeasibly heavy. And I'd already tossed all non-essential crew members into the ever-undulating arms of the Kraken. I believe my most cherished memory from this voyage has to be the discovery of an island far to the south of Albion, among waters of indescribable blue. There, men and women consort in ways even I found slightly objectionable. They have little need for clothing under that gentle sun, and their fondness for a syrupy liqueur made from an obscenely shaped fruit made it almost too easy to plunder their possessions. I might have stayed there forever had it not been for the monkey incident.
It had been over 200 years since the serene farming town of Oakvale had fallen. That sacrifice, catastrophic as it had been for everyone else, had granted Reaver exactly what he had wanted. Attention, longevity, a reputation that continued to grow long after the screams had faded. By this point, even he could not deny how far he had come. He was content with what he had achieved, energized by it, and proud. On evenings spent wandering the halls of his manor, surrounded by excess, he allowed himself the indulgence of reflection. Others spoke of his deeds as immoral, as though they carried some grand eternal weight. Reaver did not see them that way. To him, there was no higher meaning attached to what he had done. He did not think in terms of morality, nor did he feel bound by it. There was only survival, pleasure, and continuation. And by those measures, he had succeeded spectacularly.
I am filled with a wonderful weariness tonight. My bedroom is far too crowded to get a good night's sleep, and I'm too indolent to eject any of my lovely guests. Instead, I thought I would sit in my study, sipping a restorative beverage and enjoying my own company. It reminds me of my very first evening in this house. My bedfellows were fewer and less charming then, but I had little energy left anyway. It isn't every day that one murders a pirate king and takes his place. Oh, I had the vigor of youth back then. Real youth. How many must I have killed on my way to this very room? I shall never forget the look on the brigand's face, one so ill-suited to royalty of any kind. How he came to such a position, being so slow on the draw, is a perfect mystery. I feel somewhat reinvigorated now, and I hear stirrings upstairs. Perhaps the night isn't quite over yet.
While Reaver entertained himself in his mansion and familiarized himself with the rhythms of Bloodstone, events elsewhere in Albion took a darker turn. Beyond the corrupted reaches of Wraith Marsh, north in Bowerstone, the city's mayor lost his wife and daughter to a sudden and tragic illness. The grief broke him. In its wake, Lord Lucian Fairfax began the construction of an Old Kingdom artifact known as the Spire, believing it could be used to fix the world. As a man of wealth and affluence, Reaver would have heard the whispers, tales of Lucian's descent into madness, of coastal populations vanishing into slavery to feed the Spire's construction, and of a quiet hunt for living heroes who might serve Lucian's design. None of it benefited Reaver, and so none of it mattered to him, but trouble eventually found him anyway. One day, a remarkable adventurer, already being heralded as the hero of Bower Lake, made their way into Reaver's orbit. They sought his help as a fellow hero, and Reaver recognized them at once. Having already heard rumors of someone who had escaped Lucian's Spire after years of captivity, Reaver immediately saw potential. There was something to be gained here. Proximity to one of the most powerful men in Albion, Lucian, and the kind of influence that followed his name. All Reaver needed was a distraction long enough to ripen that opportunity. Conveniently, it was also the time of year when his tribute to the Shadow Court was due, and who better to send than someone who claimed to desperately need his help? It was, after all, just a small favor.
I received an unusual visitor today, an adventurer who'd toddled in through Wraithmarsh, losing neither life, limb, nor sanity on the way. This alone would have been sufficient to mark him as a unique individual, but once I'd learned he'd escaped from the demented grip of none other than Lord Lucian, I knew I had quite a catch in my hands. I've sent an emissary to speak with Lucian and come to a lucrative arrangement. Since the time of the tribute is nearing, I can already feel the wrinkles begin to form on my face. I sent the poor sod to the Shadow Court to keep him busy. I'm sure the old loon in the spire won't mind if I post him back slightly decrepit. Should make it easier to keep him locked up. I think I'll celebrate my good fortune by commissioning a new portrait. I've heard of a chap with some sort of magical apparatus that renders almost lifelike results. I believe his name is Barnum. I shall have him brought to me today.
Later that day, as Reaver stood for his photograph with Albion's finest entrepreneur, Barnum, the hero of Bower Lake returned from the Shadow Court, having delivered the seal to its judges. Barnum, meanwhile, was busy explaining the process, proudly informing Reaver that the image would need to be properly developerized, a procedure that would take no less than 3 months.
That's no good.
3 months was far too long for someone like him to wait. His irritation did not end there. Soon after, Reaver was warned that Lucian's forces had begun an assault on Bloodstone. Whatever arrangement he and Lucian had reached had clearly been discarded. Lucian wanted heroes, and it seemed he had finally realized that Reaver was one too. Reaver had planned to betray the hero of Bower Lake, but he did not anticipate being outplayed in the process. In a moment that served both of their interests, Reaver welcomed the hero into his rear passage, a concealed tunnel leading out of the mansion. Reaver always had an exit plan. Anything could happen, and he had racked up more than enough enemies over the years. As he and the hero fought their way through Lucian's guards towards the beach, they encountered two others: Hammer, a hero of strength, and Garth, a hero of will. As the hero of skill, Reaver completed the triumvirate, a familiar pattern throughout history. 3 heroes, each embodying one of the 3 heroic disciplines, together destined to shape the future of Albion when it mattered most. Interestingly enough, the hero of Bower Lake appeared to embody all 3. And it was here that the hero of skill finally understood why the heroes had made such an effort to find him. Lucian planned to reshape the world to his will, and only with his help could they hope to stop him. In this moment of desperation, Hammer and Garth asked for Reaver's aid, believing it could put an end to Lucian's designs. It was a noble cause, and one that would aid him too, but Reaver was just not interested. He had never needed anyone else for his survival, and he did not need them now. All he needed was his ship and an island far away. When one of Lucian's weapons, the Shard, tore through the coast and obliterated the Reaver, his treasured ship, he had to change his mind. What followed was something Albion had not seen since the Age of Heroes. 4 heroes fighting side by side against a common threat, united in purpose, destroying the Shard together. Even then, with his escape gone, Reaver still judged the continuation of this fight against Lucian to be against his interests. It was Teresa, the blind seer, who finally forced Reaver's hand. She appeared before him and delivered a simple truth. The people he had manipulated, the sacrifices he had so casually sent to the King of Shadows to preserve his immortality, would no longer be there for him if Lucian won. Faced with the prospect of limits for the first time in centuries, Reaver changed his mind. Charity, it seemed, suddenly suited him. Together, the heroes ventured to Hero Hill. Lucian intended to use the Spire to remake the world, and Teresa promised that through a ritual performed by the 4 of them, she could summon a weapon capable of stopping him. The ritual, however, was interrupted by Lucian's forces, and once again, Reaver adjusted his allegiance to whoever appeared most likely to secure his freedom. He reminded Lucian that they still had a deal, and that he was even willing to hand the heroes over to him free of charge. Lucian, however, already had what he wanted and ignored the request entirely. Having been brought to the Spire to conduct his own ritual to reshape the world, Lucian Fairfax began the process. The energies of the heroes of strength, skill, and will were drawn into the Spire, absorbed and channeled through Lucian himself. Reaver had survived piracy, betrayal, shadow courts, and centuries of poor company, but this appeared to be the end. That was until the hero of Bower Lake returned, armed not with brute force or grand speeches, but with an ancient Old Kingdom artifact of their own, a music box. With it, Lucian was weakened and the ritual brought to a halt. The Lord was furious, interrupted, undermined, and convinced that his vision of a new world was exactly what Albion needed. It is said that while the hero of Bower Lake was destined to destroy the great evil of this age, it was Reaver who fired the final shot. Not out of heroism, but because he was tired of Lucian's voice. Though Reaver had never wanted to be involved in a grand adventure of this sort, he had been dragged into it regardless. The hero of Bower Lake had completed their journey. Teresa claimed the spire for herself, and the heroic triumvirate were each asked what they desired in return. Garth, the hero of Will, spoke of his homeland, Samarkand. Reaver had heard of it, a land far to the east of Albion, known in his mind at least for hot nights, exotic substances, and uninhibited people. A place like that would suit him perfectly. Garth was quick to correct him, insisting it was nothing of the sort. Reaver, undeterred, assured him he would simply locate the exciting parts on his own. And so it was done. Reaver was teleported to Samarkand to begin a new adventure. Albion had grown dull anyway. Through a series of events that would have ended an ordinary person several times over, Reaver survived the great threat of the Age of Enlightenment entirely unscathed. His actions, his decisions, and his natural instinct for survival saw to that. He thrived, and he did it all while looking great.
The senile old hag was as good as her word, and I found myself magically transported to the land of Samarkand, thousands of miles from the bloody spire. There, my good fortune ended, however, as I soon found that insufferable bore Garth materializing beside me. This so-called scholar turned out to have little to teach me about his homeland, little of interest at least. I had come seeking hot nights, exotic substances, and uninhibited people, and found an excess of the first, a miserly amount of the second, and a definite shortage of the third. Still, my stay was not without its highlights. One particular evening springs to mind, my last one. I'd followed my humorless, pedantic companion into what I can only describe as the worst tavern ever to deserve such a moniker. Its pitiful cordials and feeble spirits did nothing to improve my mood, and the air was so thick with stodgy conversation one grew constipated merely by listening. It was then that I had the brilliant notion that would simultaneously catapult me out of that humdrum country and put an end to Garth's miserable existence, as well as diverting me for several minutes. I stood up in front of the sober crowd and, well, my darlings, there the extract ends.
By the time the Age of Industry began to dawn, the hero of skill had already survived more than 2.5 centuries. Reaver had lived through wars, revolutions, and entire generations, and had killed enough people along the way that the distinction had long since stopped mattering. As for the stories he told of those years, not all of them were strictly true. He often claimed to have killed the hero of Will in Samarkand. That, like many things Reaver said about himself, was largely a matter of interpretation. When he eventually returned to Albion, he found that the hero of Bower Lake had united its towns and settlements into a single kingdom and now ruled as monarch. Always willing to offer his assistance in exchange for suitable reward, Reaver worked closely with the royal family as Albion entered the early years of its industrial age. A new age demanded reinvention. Reaver refreshed himself accordingly. A new haircut, different clothes, carefully applied makeup, and a heart-shaped beauty spot placed precisely where it would be noticed. When the ruling hero eventually passed away, the mantle of ruler was left to their eldest son, Logan. Reaver, of course, once again made a point of demonstrating that he was a valuable asset to the kingdom, and one whose usefulness should not be underestimated. It was also during this era, as with those before it, that Albion faced a looming threat. This time, however, the truth of it was revealed only to the king. The Crawler, a creature of the void, sought to claim Albion for the corruption. promising to plunge the land into eternal darkness if drastic action was not taken before its arrival. Logan chose to keep the reality of this danger from the population. The decisions he made going forward were intended to safeguard his people and raise the gold needed to prepare the kingdom's defenses. Without understanding his reasons, however, those same decisions came to define him as a feared ruler, even a tyrant, seen not for what he sought to prevent, but for the severity of the rules he imposed. One of these decisions affected one man in particular and proved extremely useful to Reaver. In an attempt to raise an army for an eventual war with the forces of darkness, King Logan turned to Professor Ernest Faraday, the owner of Faraday Industries, and requested that he put his bright mind and mechanical creations to use as weapons for Albion. Faraday, just like the majority of the land, saw Logan as a tyrant and refused to allow his work to be used against his people. For that refusal, he was imprisoned. Reaver watched all of this from a comfortable distance. Faraday Industries was one of the most powerful companies in the kingdom, and with its founder removed, it suddenly found itself in need of a new direction, new leadership. Reaver was happy to provide it. With his influence, the hero claimed control of the company for himself and showed Logan just how valuable he could be. Under its new name, Reaver Industries, child labor became policy, wages were cut without hesitation, and fear proved a far more effective motivator than loyalty. Those who complained rarely did so twice. On one occasion, Reaver felt it necessary to remind the people who they worked for, and he enjoyed doing so immensely. If anyone even thought about revolts, he was more than happy to demonstrate what happened when workers complained about so-called harsh working conditions, usually by way of a public execution.
To raise morale, I am offering prizes to the most deserving workers. The rules that will govern what I like to call the Reaver Team Spirit Award are these. Firstly, any worker that so much as murmurs another complaint will be shot. Secondly, any worker who takes more than a 3-second break will be shot. Thirdly, any worker who breaks any other rules I have yet to formulate will, yes, you guessed it, be shot. Return to work now. As you know, I'm a generous man and likely to start handing out prizes right away. So go on, shoo! Be off with you! Chop chop!
Outside of his business interests in Bowerstone, Reaver settled in Millfields, once Bower Lake, transformed into a glittering district for the wealthy. It was there that he became involved with a very select secret society. He lived extravagantly, welcoming members of that circle, along with other guests, into his manor for increasingly excessive parties and other pursuits, better left unnamed. The house itself had been crafted for his exact tastes. Hidden rooms, portraits charting his many adventures, private arenas, and discreet pleasure chambers tucked carefully out of sight. Many of those who moved within his circle willingly embraced life as Balverines. Reaver himself considered the idea briefly before dismissing it. Concealing a face like his beneath fur and filth would have been an unforgivable waste. These secret parties typically involved welcoming in or deliberately luring victims to participate in the Wheel of Misfortune. The wheel itself appeared to have been salvaged from the Temple of Shadows in Rookridge, repurposed for a cruelty no less sincere. Those drawn into Reaver's games were fought to fight through gauntlets of creatures he had collected over years of travel. Across Albion and beyond, Reaver had encountered all manner of beasts and killers. Wolves from the mountains, hobs dragged from the forests, mercenaries who sold themselves for gold, hollow men taken from corrupted lands, sand furies from Aurora, and, on occasion, even his Balverine guests, should they feel inclined to join the entertainment. The hero of skill rarely wanted for something to occupy him. Between these endeavors, he took to recording the tales of his exploits in an autobiography. There seemed to be nothing he could not do, and still, despite it all, he often found his thoughts returning to the man he had once been.
I awoke from the nightmare again. One would think that more than 200 years would suffice to blunt its steel. But still I see Oakvale devoured by shadows. Still those shrieks fill the air. How much longer must I live before they fall silent? Such dreams belong to another time, to another man, one who would recoil from the things I've done since that night. Who might even care about all the sacrifices I've offered up to the odious judges over how long? Hundreds of years. I see that man as he was back then, as beautiful as me, as fiery as me, but so delicate, so breakable, and so afraid of death. I see him summon the Shadow Court into this world, oblivious to the consequences. He asks them for immunity for the disease of time and death, and they grant it. Then I see him running madly through fields, the realization of just what price he has unwittingly paid hanging like a tragedy mask from his face. He falls to his knees before the town he called home, now a dark circus of screams. Hers is among them, but he can do nothing to stop it. What a weak, despicable man he is. But I am not he. I am Reaver. And I will sleep much better after this chalice of wine.
Reaver had lived through many ages. The Age of Enlightenment, an era of piracy, and now the Age of Industry. He had been present for more history than most men could comprehend, and fortunate in his own estimation to have witnessed so much of it firsthand. Lucian the Mad, who sought to unmake Albion in order to create a new world, the hero who rose to rule the kingdom. And now, in this age, a war brewing between King Logan and his younger sibling, who sought to ignite a rebellion and claim the throne for themselves. As a loyal ally to King Logan, Reaver initially sided with the crown, well aware that Logan's influence offered wealth, protection, and continued relevance. Over time, however, the younger sibling, who also appeared to be a hero, began to rally significant support of their own. Influence shifted, power followed, and Reaver, as ever, paid close attention to the efforts of the hero of Brightwall. As Reaver enforced increasingly harsh punishments on workers who dared to rebel, word began to reach him of the young royal's exploits. From Mistpeak to Brightwall and even into Bowerstone itself, their name carried. Reaver, infamous in his own right, was not unused to attention, and he even enjoyed a modest fanbase. One admirer in particular, a woman named Benjamina, took that devotion to unusual lengths. She adored Reaver, maintained a shrine to him in her home, complete with a large portrait, and nursed a particular desire for a pair of his underwear, for reasons best left unexplored. At one of his masquerade balls, Reaver was delighted to discover the young royal in attendance, accompanied by Paige, the leader of the rebellion against Logan. Reaver cared little for politics beyond their entertainment value, and if the young hero were to die during one of his parties, so be it. It would spare Logan the inconvenience. Instead, the evening took an unexpected turn. The young royal survived every round of the Wheel of Misfortune, and in doing so, killed several of Reaver's Balverine guests. Following the uprising, Logan lost his grip on the throne and the young hero was crowned in his place. With that victory came a revelation Albion could no longer ignore. A greater darkness was on its way, and if the kingdom was to survive it, vast sums of gold would need to be raised. This was Reaver's specialty. Making money was something he excelled at. He pushed to reinforce child labor, to halt the refurbishment of Albion's old quarter, to reopen the mines of Aurora and force its citizens to work them in exchange for inclusion in the kingdom, to turn a public building into a brothel rather than a shelter or orphanage, to divert the sewage of Bowerstone into the small settlement of Morningwood, to restrict access to Brightwall Academy to only the wealthy, to drain Bower Lake and convert it into a quarry, and finally, to strip Mistpeak Valley of its forests so the wood could be turned into buildings and furniture elsewhere. Every solution worked, every one of them raised gold, and every one of them came at the cost Reaver never had to pay himself. If anything, whether the new ruler agreed or disagreed with Reaver on these suggestions, Reaver Industries was still contracted to conduct the work. He earned gold anyway. And when that final year came to an end, with the gold raised, defenses established, the Corruptor ready to strike, and Albion preparing for the greatest battle it had ever faced, Reaver left a note.
Note for a monarch. Greetings, Your Majesty. I do hope your battle against the dark forces so intent on destroying our way of life went well. It will be such a disappointment to find you all dead when I return, for yes, I must take my leave now and attend to a matter of a somewhat personal nature. It is a regular appointment of mine, one that grows more tiresome with every passing year. Perhaps I will tell you more about it one day. Until then, allow me to say that it has been a privilege to serve you, and I eagerly anticipate doing so again in the near future. Tatty bye, your friend and loyal attendant, Reaver.
Above all else, Reaver once again prioritized his own survival, and while the battle went on without him, it was one Albion survived. The legendary hero Reaver's adventures did not end with the defeat of the Corruptor. Some claim that in the years that followed, he encountered Ben Finn after the soldier discovered the fate of his lost brother, William, a man Reaver legally owned, and had transformed into something else entirely. According to these accounts, William had been transformed into a half-breed, something infused with the essence of Albion's monsters, Hobbs, Balverines, bound together through the magic of shadow creatures. It is further said that Reaver offered to release William and even cure him on one condition, that Ben put an end to Paige, whose continued interference in Bowerstone had long proved inconvenient to Reaver's interests. She was, by his estimation, simply too much trouble. This tale came to an end, for Reaver at least, when he left Ben and Paige to fight a rampaging horde of half-breeds, while he returned to his guests to drink hot cocoa. 7 years after the defeat of the Corruptor, it was also claimed that Reaver turned his attention towards Queen Layla, the wife of the hero of Brightwall. With her husband having left once again for Samarkand to confront the darkness, Reaver was said to have isolated her from her remaining support. He encouraged her to disregard the counsel of her other advisors, and through that influence, began steering policy to suit his own interests. These measures included the cutting of trade with Aurora, the introduction of a nightly curfew, and, most importantly to Reaver, the continued expansion of Reaver Industries. Through this influence, it was further claimed that Reaver made use of the Sanctuary, a place only heroes could enter, and one the hero of Brightwall had previously used to plan the rebellion against King Logan. Once a thief in the small town of Oakvale, Reaver rose through centuries of adventures and excesses across Albion and beyond. A man of silky charm and practiced manipulation, both of minds and of bodies. He learned early how easily people could be moved and how rarely that movement came at a cost to him. He lost everything the day Oakvale fell, unaware of the true price of his wish, and in his diary entries, there is guilt, real guilt, but it is unfocused and curiously selective. Not guilt for the countless lives ruined in the centuries that followed, not for the stolen youth he demanded year after year, not for the workers crushed beneath his industries or the families destroyed in his pursuit of wealth and renown. Reaver is a hero by blood alone. By nature, he is something else entirely. A perfectly dressed, impeccably spoken villain that you can't help but love. This is probably the longest Fable video. Actually, the longest dedicated lore video I have ever made. It's kind of funny considering my first Reaver video was so small. While writing this, I was thinking about what the reboot could offer and if any of the original characters could return. While I admit it is unlikely, who would be the most likely to return? Reaver is the cockroach of Albion, undying and able to survive anything. If any character would manage to squeeze himself into existence in the Fable reboot, it would be him. While working on this, I've been watching the Celebrity Traitors in the UK, and while Stephen Fry is in it, I completely forgot that Jonathan Ross, also in the Celebrity Traitors, was also in Fable 3 as Barry Hatch. What a small world. I was hesitant to talk about Fable Blood Ties and Fable Edge of the World just because the canonicity of these books are ambiguous, and some canon works against the canon of the games, but it is interesting regardless. Reaver is a much loved character in the series, and I think I understand why. He's complex, charming, and genuinely interesting to be around. He also has the best phrases. Tatty bye, bye Z, tootsie bye. He has everything Lucian did not have, arguably the worst villain in the Fable series. Not a lot of people played Fable 3, but the Corrupted did have an interesting story that offered massive changes to Albion. Lucian just wanted to make a wish. Just like my latest Half-Life videos, I went with more of a relaxed voiceover, amplified by in-game audio to enhance that documentary feel instead of a lore video. Let me know what you thought. I would also love to know who else in this amazing series you would like me to cover. This week, I had either Reaver or Teresa, both incredible characters with very different stories. I was drawn to Reaver a little more though. I also wanted to add a small section at the end of these videos. Instead of just being a voice who tells stories, I wanted to talk about the games we're playing. I'm currently playing through Assassin's Creed Origins. I have been for a while now. It's a long game with so much to explore. Sadly, there is little substance to the locations and the world. While big, it just feels empty. I've started it though, so I have to finish it. I do intend to do a full Fable trilogy playthrough before the reboot releases though. What are you guys playing currently? I would once again like to shout out my thumbnail artist, Chick. Look at Reaver in all his glory. Thumbnails are also now available on YouTube memberships and Patreon. As always, like the video if you liked it, dislike it if you did not, and let me know what you thought in the comments. Subscribe if you're not already. At last, a huge thank you to those who help support on channel members and Patreon. Queen Arby, Lewis, Oren X, Drakey Phoenix, Danocal Drawings, 501st Clone Boy, Ruben Mendoza, Imperial Embers, Canifex, Jimsy, Average Soul, Azu, Jonas, Yali Rodriguez, Detroit, Motzi, Brina Lee, Jacqueline Lavelle, King Jack, Lifeblood, Reaper Gaming, Mamet, Kyther Zin, Zuni115, Fall Classic Source, Pooncake, Pointless Man 47, Super Rifle, Frankie, Tiki, and Epic Stuff Thing channel. What did you think of this topic? How much do you love Reaver? And what would you like me to cover next? This is where our story ends. Check back soon for a new one. Tatty bye.